So I think one of the most difficult things when I first started to homeschool was I just really had no idea what I was doing. You can Google things, you can look things up, but it doesn't help you really get started because there's just so much information out there and some of it is contradictory and it's super complicated. And when you have compounding factors like I had where I couldn't actually join any homeschooling groups because I had a child who was transgender, it becomes even more difficult because there's no one to turn to. There's no one to go to when you have questions or when you just aren't sure that you're doing things right. And let me tell you, you're really not sure that you're doing things right. So the first thing that people really need to look at and to understand is that the laws are different in every single state that you are in. And you have to make sure that you are in compliance with your state laws. Some places are much harder to homeschool in than other places. I feel that I'm actually pretty lucky because in Pennsylvania, it's not terribly hard to become a homeschooler. It's not terribly hard to stay in compliance. You have to keep a journal here. You have to make sure that you are hitting um, the right academic goals. You need to make sure that you're turning in an affidavit every year. You need to make sure that there is a teacher who comes and evaluates your work and make sure that you are doing the things that you need to do. But I think that overall, it wasn't a horrible process, especially once you know what the expectations are and what the dates are when things need to be turned in. And, so make sure that you check out your state laws to make sure that you will be in compliance and that it's actually possible to homeschool where you are because some places it is just much harder to homeschool. So, we are going to be taking a look at some of the different ways to homeschool. And this is certainly not an exclusive list. It's not a completely comprehensive list because there are a million ways to do just about anything. And I think a lot of times when people very first start homeschooling, they try to recreate a classroom, right? They try to recreate exactly what they had in a regular schoolroom. And that's not always what people need to strive for. And some people certainly will do that and they'll do it successfully, but that's not the only way to homeschool. So, we're going to be talking about some different ways to homeschool. So, we're going to start with classical homeschooling. This is what people tend to think about. And with classical homeschooling, you're really teaching children how to think, how to get the base knowledge that they need, and then to put all that together into a way where they can be eloquent, they can defend themselves, they can speak in public, they can write well. They really have all the knowledge that they need. So, and this starts with three different stages. There's the grammar stage, which is where you build your base knowledge. You're learning your math, your science, your language. You're learning to write. You're learning to read. You're learning to do workbooks and think through things, right? This is a lot of parent led learning. You might use books, you might use special projects. It doesn't mean just because you're doing this classical homeschooling that it has to be, super boring or limited to, only things that are in textbooks. You can be creative in your learning and how you do it. But your next step is to create concrete reasoning where they can take these base skills and they can use their logic and their thinking to think through problems and to put into use the things that they have learned. And then the final step is the rhetoric stage, where they should be able to write convincing papers, where they should be able to articulate their arguments and their thoughts and their reasoning into an overall picture. So that is classical homeschooling. Next one I want to look at is unschooling. For us, unschooling was a really good thing, and the reason being that unschooling allows you to focus on what your child needs at the time. My child needed time to work on mental health. To be honest, we needed time to work through the issues that we were having related to autism and to the complexities that come with that. And so unschooling was a great fit for us because it is child led, is child centered, is based on what they want and where they are at their specific time, right? So maybe they're not ready to learn to read at 6. Maybe they'll be ready at 8. And unschooling allows kids to follow their passions, to find out what it is that they like, and to work on those things, to really tinker around and play around and learn at their own pace, with their own interests leading the way. And sometimes that's going to come out with amazing results. I have met some amazing unschooled students who are really so thoughtful in what they do because they've always chosen how to run their educations. They're very active participants. Some kids are totally online learning, right? Some kids are maybe instead of going traditional homeschool, maybe you sign up for your local programs that are all computer based, but they're run by the state. It's basically like doing school at school, but from the safety of your home. This is great for kids who maybe have social anxiety, maybe have medical issues that mean that they have a difficulty to making it to the classroom on any kind of regular basis. Maybe this is a great alternative for students who have compromised, or maybe for students who really just need to not be in the traditional classroom but do well with the structure of a traditional classroom. This is going to give you schedules, it's going to give you academic goals, it's going to give you tests, and none of this ends up being on the parent except for making sure they log in and they're completing their work, right? There's really, this takes all of the homeschooling out of the parents' hands and still keeps it in the hands of whatever agency that you are going through. Generally, we call this cyber schooling, right? So some parents use curriculums and they stay at home. This is a lot like your traditional schooling. You have books, you go through and you learn the same way you would in school, but you are in an at home situation. Um, a lot of the parents that I know that homeschool in this particular way, they tend to use a more religious curriculum. So maybe something like a Becca. And, they tend to do it because they want to make sure that the education that their student is getting is in line with their morals and their philosophies. Now, does that mean that everybody who schools in this way is super religious? No, not necessarily. Sometimes this is the fit for people who want to leave the school system and just have a little bit more flexibility in their schooling. Maybe you want to spend 4 hours on schooling or 3 hours on schooling instead of an entire day. So there's a lot of reasons why people will choose to homeschool. This one is fun. This is road schooling. So it is literally traveling and learning as you go and making your education, it's going to line up with what you are doing out in the world. So maybe you're visiting state parks, maybe you're learning about nature, maybe you're learning about American history by seeing American historic places. Maybe you are learning about art, and so you go to an art museum. It's super, super cool to include this in. And what you're going to see is there's a lot of crossing over between these boundaries, right? Like, so maybe you are classically homeschooled, but you're also going to art museums, or you're going to state parks, or you're doing, so there's a lot of mixing, and that's called eclectic. And we're going to get to that in a little bit. The next one that I think is super cool is world schooling. And I know some students who world school. Literally, their families go from country to country. They are extremely well traveled. One student that I know speaks 7 languages and is just very, very fluent in different ideas and cultures, and because they have lived in so many places and they have seen so many things. So extremely well educated, these kids, in my experience with them. They have a better grasp of history, they understand culture better, they have a better understanding of the various belief systems of people because they have been exposed to them. And when you are a world schooler, you are specifically going around seeking out opportunities to understand other cultures, other practices, other belief systems, and to really see and learn how to function in a broader world than just the one that you were born into. And of course, eclectic homeschooling, which is a mixture really of any of the other groups that you really wanted. So maybe you're crafting, maybe you're creating, maybe you're using some curriculum, maybe you're using some online classes, maybe you are traveling, maybe you're doing sightseeing. So there's a lot of ways to combine it all into your own custom program. And so long as you are following the laws of your state, you can do this. There's nothing that says, hey, this is the only way to homeschool and you have to homeschool this way. Well, unless, of course, that's in your state law. But there is a lot of flexibility in most cases to homeschool in the way that feels right for you, that feels right for your family, that feels right for your child. There's also something called the Montessori education. This is something that was developed in trying to work with special learners, learners who maybe had a harder time in the more classical versions of homeschooling or in regular schooling. This is an enriched environment. Students learn by doing. If you take a look at a Montessori classroom, there are activities everywhere you look, and it's self led. Children get to decide what it is that they are going to work on and work through. Um, and they do that by just going to a center, picking out their things and playing around with them. How do things work? How do things fit together? And it is a very exploration based learning system. uh, a lot of wooden toys in the Montessori process, but not necessarily just that. It is also, now, this isn't a teacher leading the process, right? This is the teacher is maybe a helper, or the parent is someone who might be there to help a child learn how to self regulate, but it's really on the child to do that for themselves. So there are just a ton of ways to homeschool. And really, so long as you have a plan, your heart is in the right place, and you choose something that is a fit for your family and your child, you're going to have an amazing experience. Are there going to be rough times? Absolutely. Every parent's going to have that time when their kid just does not want to do the assignment, just doesn't want to cooperate. You read those stories all the time, but that's okay. That would happen if they were in regular public school too. So you are not alone. It just happens to be that because you're a homeschool parent, this is now on you to deal with completely. But check out my other videos. We're going to be talking about more, each of these in more depth in future videos, as well as other common issues that come up with homeschooling. And of course, check out my content as in regards to being part of the LGBTQ community, because that is my impetus for going into this particular series at all. So I will talk with you later. Everyone, have a wonderful week.